Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Pierce, and I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series at Brookline Booksmith, just outside of Boston, Massachusetts, and your host for today's conversation. The Transnational Series focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. I just want to offer a quick Zoom webinar tutorial. At the bottom of the screen, you'll see a few icons. One of those is a Q&A icon where you can enter in your questions at any time during the conversation. Another button will get you to the chat window. That space is there for you all. Please feel free to chat during the event. I will be in the chat as well, dropping in useful information, including links to books by our authors. We do make every effort to keep these events free to attend in the hopes that you'll purchase the featured books from us. So thank you in advance for taking a look and supporting independent bookstores. And finally, you can see us, but we can't see you. So relax and please enjoy the conversation. Today, I have the very great honor of introducing Bora Chung, Anton Hur, and E.J. Ko here to discuss and celebrate the release of Cursed Bunny. Bora Chung has written 3 novels and 3 collections of short stories. She has a master's in Russian and East European area studies from Yale University and a PhD in Slavic literature from Indiana University. She has taught Russian language and literature and science fiction studies at Yonsei University and translates modern literary works from Russian and Polish into Korean. Anton Hur was born in Stockholm and currently resides in Seoul. A graduate of the Korean University College of Law and Seoul National University Graduate School, he works as a writer and translator and won PEN translation grants transatlantically and was double longlisted and shortlisted for the 2022 International Booker Prize. And today's moderator, E.J. Ko, is the author of the memoir, The Magical Language of Others, which won the Washington State Book Award, the Pacific Northwest Book Award, the Association of Asian American Studies Book Award, and was longlisted for the PEN Open Book Awards. She is also the author of the poetry collection, A Lesser Love, and the co-translator of Yi Wan's poetry collection, The World's Lightest Motorcycle. She is the recipient of the 2022 Artistic Achievement Award from the Korean American Coalition, and her debut novel, The Liberators, is forthcoming in fall 2023. I'm so thrilled to have them here together in conversation, and now Bora, Anton, and E.J.
Oh, I think they want us to start the reading.
Really? All right. Do I just start reading? Okay. I am going to read the first part of the head in Korean. And Anton will read his wonderful translation in English. So here goes. 어느 날 물을 내리고 화장실을 막 나오려 할 때였다. 어머니, 그녀는 뒤를 돌아보았다. 변기 속에서 머리가 하나 튀어나와 그녀를 부르고 있었다. 어머니, 그녀는 머리를 한참 동안 가만히 쳐다보았다. 물을 내렸다. 쏴 하는 소리와 함께 머리는 사라졌다. 그녀는 화장실을 나왔다. 며칠 후 화장실에서 그녀는 다시 머리를 만났다. 어머니, 그녀는 다시 물을 내리려 했다. 머리는 황급히 소리쳤다. 안 돼요. 잠시만. 그녀는 물을 내리려던 손을 멈추고 변기 속의 머리를 잠시 들여다보았다. 정확히 말하자면 머리가 아니라 머리처럼 보이는 어떤 것이라고 해야 옳을 것이다. 크기는 보통 사람 머리의 3분의 2 정도로 아무렇게나 빚은 찰흙덩어리 같은 누렇고 희끄머레한 머리통을 헝클어지고 물에 젖은 머리카락이 드문드문 덮고 있었다. 귀는 없었다. 머리카락 아래에는 눈썹도 없이 가로 쭉 찢어져 머리카락 아래에는 눈썹도 없이 가로 쭉 찢어져 떴는지 감았는지 모를 두 눈이 있었다. 그 아래에 있는 뭉그러진 덩어리가 아마 코인 것 같았다. 입 역시 입술도 없이 그냥 가로로 갈라져 있었다. 그런 입이 뻐끔거리며 그녀를 향해 말을 하고 있었다. 새된 목소리에는 물에 빠져 죽어가는 사람 같은 꼴록꼴록하는 소리가 섞여 있어 알아듣기 힘들었다. 그녀는 물었다. 너는 무엇이냐? 머리는 대답했다. 저는 머리입니다. 그녀는 다시 물었다. 그래, 그건 알겠다. 그런데 왜 내 변기 속에 존재하는 거냐? 그리고 왜 나를 어머니라고 부르는 거냐? 머리는 입술 없는 입을 서투르게 뻐끔거렸다. 당신이 변기 속에 버리곤 했던 빠진 머리카락과 당신의 배설물과 뒤를 닦은 휴지 등 당신이 변기 속에 버린 것들로 인하여 제가 생겨났기에 당신을 어머니라고 부르는 것입니다. 그녀는 화를 냈다. 나는 너 같은 것에게 내 변기를 차지할 권리를 준 적이 없다. 너는 나를 어머니라고 하지만 나는 너 같은 걸 만든 적이 없으니 널 없애버릴 사람을 부르기 전에 썩 꺼져라. 머리는 대답했다. 대단한 것을 바라는 게 아닙니다. 그저 이제까지처럼 변기 안에 오물을 버려주시면 그것으로 나머지 몸을 이루겠습니다. 그러면 여기서 나가서 멀리 떠나 제 힘으로 살아갈 테니 저에게 신경 쓰지 마시고 이제까지처럼 변기를 사용해 주십시오. 그녀는 차갑게 말했다. 이것은 내 변기니까 당연히 이제까지처럼 사용할 것이다. 하지만 너 같은 게 내 변기 안에 숨어 있다는 생각만 해도 기분이 나쁘다. 네가 몸을 이루건 말건 그건 내 할 바가 아니다. 네가 뭘 하건 상관없으니 앞으로는 내 앞에 나타나지 말았으면 좋겠다. 머리는 변기 속으로 사라졌다. Alright, Anton.
This is from The Head, which is the opening story of Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung. The Head. She was about to flush the toilet. Mother? She looked back. There was a head popping out of the toilet, calling for her. Mother? The woman looked at it for a moment. Then she flushed the toilet. The head disappeared in a rush of water. She left the bathroom. A few days later, she met the head again in the bathroom. Mother! The woman reached to flush the toilet again. The head sputtered, No, just a minute. The woman stayed her hand and looked down at the head of the toilet. It was probably more accurate to refer to it as a thing that vaguely looked like a head than an actual head. It was about 2/3 the size of an adult's head and resembled a lump of carelessly slapped together yellow and gray clay, with a few scattered clumps of wet hair. No ears, no eyebrows. 2 slits for eyes so narrow that she couldn't tell if its eyes were open or closed. The crushed mound of flesh that was meant to be its nose. The mouth was also a lipless slit. This slit was awkwardly opening and closing as it talked to her, its strange speech mixed with the gurgling of a person drowning, making it difficult to understand. What in bloody hell are you? The woman demanded. I call myself the head replied. You would, obviously, the woman said. But why are you in my toilet? And why are you calling me mother? The head strained as it formed unpracticed speech with its lipless mouth. My body was created with the things you dumped down the toilet, like your fallen out hair and feces and toilet paper you used to wipe your behind. The woman became furious. I never gave the likes of you any permission to live in my toilet. I never even created you in the first place, so stop calling me mommy. Leave before I call the exterminators. I only want so little, the head hastily added. I'm only asking that you keep dumping your body waste in the toilet so I can finish creating the rest of my body. Then I'll go far away from here and live by my own means. So please just keep using the toilet like you always have. This is my toilet, the woman said coldly. So of course I'm going to use it like I always have. But I can't bear to think of a creature like you living in it. Finishing your body is none of my concern. I don't care what you do, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped appearing. The head disappeared into the toilet. Thank you.
The whole time that when each of you were reading, I could see each of you smiling so big to hear the other person read. And anyway, I just want to say I am so honored, so humbled to be here to celebrate this momentous feat. I've got to say, I haven't stopped thinking about it since I picked it up. And to celebrate Bora and Anton for this incredible work that I think will stay with us forever. And this is also a moment to remember. So thank you. And I realized through the reading, thank you for also sharing the relationship that you have with each other and for letting us see how you take that relationship all around the world and through your work. And that's very inspiring also as a fellow writer and translator to see the way both of you are together. It's so beautiful. I'm going to start off with the first question for Bora here. So you just read The Head, and in the spirit of the things that we dump into the toilet, these things making its own body and having its own life, what are some of the things that didn't make it into the collection? And what are other stories or versions of these stories that may haunt this collection?
I wrote about 100 or so short stories. from 1998 to 2016 when my editor was picking out stories for this particular or the Korean original. So there are about 90 plus stories that did not make into this collection. So this is actually a very small portion of what I wrote, and I have some more stories. So this is, I guess this, I can't really, we don't have enough time to talk about all the stories that were not included here. This is more fantasy and horror. Anton is now working on the next one with Hunt for Star, which is more purely science fiction. So there are like smart elevators and smart cars and stuff. So yeah, those were, I wouldn't say they didn't, I wouldn't say they didn't make it to this collection. They deserve a separate book.
That's great news to hear, and a great way to start this conversation, knowing that there's much more to come. And Anton, you must be just crowded under work at the moment. So thank you. But I wanted to ask you, Anton, about, there's this really moment I read you talking about the embodiment, and it's where the main character is lying in the hospital and imagining herself floating up to the ceiling. And you talked about this verb change that you did. So I want to know what sort of compelled you in the moment, and what sort of questions or thoughts were you having as you were completing the edits there?
Oh yeah, this is my Mariah Carey story where where I was so desperate to because I needed one more additional grant to be able to translate Cursed Bunny, and LTI Korea kind of fell short on the amount that they were supposed to give us, and so it's like, okay, I need to win one more grant. Like, so very strategically, I was like, okay, I need to submit to Penheim, which is a completely ridiculous idea to have because they only pick so many books. And so I was like, oh, but I really need just a little bit more money to be able to do this book. And so I just put my all into that translation. And there is that part of The Meaning of Mariah Carey, written by Mariah Carey, where she writes the song called Fly Like a Bird. And she has this moment where she felt like the hand of God touched her song, and the hand of God touched her hand. And I was like, that's the moment I had when I like put that last verb in place. I think, I don't even remember the verb anymore. I think it's yanked, because I think I had pulled at first, like she felt like she was being pulled from the ceiling. But I was like, no, that's not strong enough. So I think I went with yanked or something like that, or jerked, one of those. And then once I put that in, I felt like, oh, angel choir singing, because like, oh, this, like, everything kind of made sense in the translation. There's so many cliches when it comes to writing and translating, which is a subset of writing, I believe, where they're like, use stronger verbs, or, use active voice, or, that kind of thing. But, when you follow those rules, most of the time they really do work. Like, it doesn't really feel like they do when you do it on the page, but then the cumulative effect of doing it over the course of your prose, like, there are very good reasons for using passive voice, and there are very good reasons for, using a weaker verb, etc., or something more abstracted, because maybe you don't want to be too clear in what is going on. You want a bit more ambiguity, and that's fine. But I felt like sometimes, those rules really do exist for a reason. So that was a really, really great moment. And I was like, I don't care if this book never, gets that grant. I had this beautiful experience of translating the story, and I will be a translator forever for the rest of my life because I had this experience and not anything else. So yeah, that was my Mariah Carey moment. Or thanks to Cursed Bunny, thanks to Bora.
I love that, Anton. I feel like I've met you many times before now, because I've watched so many of your interviews and your videos, and it's just so exciting how much you share your process. And I really take that to heart because I know there are a lot of writers, translators here tonight that want to hear more about what that's like and, going for these grants and doing the revisions and feeling that this works for me no matter what. And that's just so heartening to hear. So thank you very much. And so Bora, on the thread of talking about what we expect out of writing and kind of the rules of writing, I've noticed that as I'm reading your stories, it feels like I'm also at times reading not just parts, but more like stanzas or maybe chapter sections of like something that would be in a novel. And it all sort of lends itself to being just writing to me. And I mean it in the very best way. So there's like a poetry in it because of the rhythm where something sounds like an aria or a stage direction. And the images, I'm particularly thinking of Rulers of the Winds and Sands. I thought that could be a prose poem, actually. Every sentence being so important and needed. And the organization of your writing, I just thought you really extend your work beyond sort of what we might call it or the way we might package it. It sort of resists being packaged and being called one thing or another. And I'd love to ask, did you always write this way? And what was your journey into writing the way you do?
I have no idea. I never learned how to write, and I never seriously considered my writing artistic or poetic. So I don't know. Sorry.
I'm going to add spoken like a true genius. It's just like,
Thank you.
but and I mean that in a really exciting way that I feel that your work, whether it's intended or not, it does all of those things. And so thank you for doing that. It's really exciting. Anton, thank you for smiling and nodding and saying, I see what you're saying. So Anton, there's something I also wanted to ask you about your translations. I notice, and this might be specific, but I noticed that when it says a boy, a young man, a woman, a girl, it seems like at first that this could be anybody, but there's such specificity to that. It's not the boy or the young girl, or they become so specific in themselves, and it works so incredibly well. And I wonder what insights you can share with translating so effectively and with such clarity is what I want to say, with such clarity. And I think it lends to your artistry as a translator.
Oh, I think this lends to Bora's artistry as a writer, because it's really her writing that's doing that. So the Korean language, as you know very well, is what's called like a null subject language. Like you can cancel the subject and it would still be grammatically correct. Like you could say 밥 먹었어, ate food, and that means you ate food. Like contextually, oh, you ate food. If I say 밥 먹었어, like if it becomes like a question, it means did you eat food? Like did you have lunch? So Korean is kind of like contextually we can tell like who is speaking when. And so I think the best Korean writers are like Bora. The best Korean writers are very well trained in how do I make it obvious that it's this person talking and not the other person, or not 50 other people. And quite often, there are several people having a conversation at the same time in Kurspani, but it's very clear who is speaking when, because it's just the weight that Bora puts into different people, and the characters are so different in how they sound in Korean. And all of that, a translator can be able to capture if they read very carefully the text. And I feel like that's really all I have to do as a translator when it comes to translating, especially like really, really good writers. With bad writers, I have to always ask I have to always be like, who is talking right now? Is it this person? I have to make a decision. Do I want to bother asking the author, or am I just going to make an executive decision? Like, it's, with bad writers, you have to do that. But with Bora, you never have to do that because it's, oh, this person is talking, this person is talking, this person is talking. And so what I was kind of worried about that for coming into English is that in English, you can't cancel the subject. So what you end up with is a huge mess of the man said, the man said, the man said, the man said. I'm like, okay, we get it. It's the man said. So I kind of had to, if any, I kind of had to like try to cancel as much of that repetition as possible without breaking kind of like the line of reading. And that's when editors come in handy because they'll tell me, oh, like you kind of broke the thread here, or oh, you kind of like this part becomes confusing. And so that's where editors save you. So it's their artistry that comes in at that point. So for a translator, I think the most important thing is not so much that you are a great translator, which is essential, obviously, but much more important in literary translation is that you're a good reader. And so that you are able to answer the questions that your editor asks you, and that you are able to solve those problems because you know what it's supposed to look like. And that's why, there are a lot of people think that translators are really great at language, and I guess we are, but that's not why we happen to be translators. There are a lot of translators who can't speak their source language, for example, but they create beautiful translations regardless. And this is because it's not so much that they are great at the language, it's really because they're great at reading. You really have to have that literary component and to be able to read a text very deeply and at the level that the author intended, and really feel that the author is guiding you on the page. Like this is a very kind of primeval, almost like a visceral feeling. I always use the word visceral when it comes to reading, because for me it's a very physical act. It's not intellectual. It's not really intellectual. So when Bora is telling a story, I feel like she's really telling it to me. Like she's sitting across from me at the desk, and when I'm typing, I'm writing down what she's saying. So that's how it has to feel like. And yeah, and Bora is one of those authors. It was really funny because I was translating. We ran into each other at an airport in Singapore on the way to the same literary festival, and I was like, "Oh, Bora, like, I was with you for the past 6 hours because I was translating your work." So she was like sitting on the plane with me, telling me the story while I typed. And so yeah, so that's really due to Bora's artistry.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. I love when you talk about literary translation, and even when you're not connected as much to the source language, finding a way. And I think it's so inviting. It really sort of continues to push the next generation of translators to give their hand to this work. And so, Bora, I would love to ask you about passage in Reunion, I believe is the last story of the collection. And maybe I don't want to give too much away, but I doubt that no one's read this. I mean, everyone's read this by now. And I would love to ask you to talk or tell us more about this passage that has stayed with me for quite a while, but it goes, my parents and their parents' generations after surviving the Korean War had always, just like the generation that survived World War II, set their purpose not to live a human life, but to have an animal's instinct for survival. So I'd love you to tell us about that. And, how do you feel about that today, hearing that back? Does it hold the same meaning for you?
Yeah, of course. Well, my grandmother, both my grandmothers went through the Korean War. They were born during the Japanese annexation period, and then when they became adults, Korea was free and independent again for a very short while, and then the war broke out. My father's family actually comes from what is now the northern end of North Korea. So they had a very dramatic experience of running away, being a refugee. So my father's family, the entire family was refugees, and they came to the southern part, and they had to cross many rivers, and they when the U.S. Army were retreating, they the famous January 4th Hungnam, they decided I'm very grateful for it, because they decided to take all the refugees with them. So they took on as many Korean refugees to their boat, their ships, and yay, that's how I became. And it took them many days because ships were not that fast back then, I guess. And my grandmother and my aunts would tell me that my dad was just a baby, and if he cried, somebody would come and snatch the baby and just throw them in the ocean, because they would get shot. Otherwise, everybody else will die. And my father slept the whole time, and he was very silent. So that's how they made through the night and came to the South. And I grew up with these stories, and then when I was in middle school, high school, the Soviet Union fell, and suddenly that threat of Cold War, the nuclear war, and the extinct of humankind kind of disappeared. And then I could go to the former Soviet bloc, so I went to Poland, and there were so many things that were kept alive to remind the people of the Second World War and what it did to them. I was in Poland in September, and I went to the Warsaw Powstania Warszawskiego, what is it? The Warsaw Uprising Museum, and it felt really. I mean, it's a must. If you go to Poland, if you go to Warsaw, you have to go to the Warsaw Uprising Museum. It made me very proud of Poles, and at the same time, it reminds me a lot of our War Memorial Museum and what my aunts and my grandmother would tell me, and when I was in Poland, my school was up a hill. Like Poland, the name Poland in Polish means a field, so the entire country is flat. And this one school that I went to was up a hill, and I had to climb up that hill. And in the middle of that hill, there was this very old castle, what looked like a castle. We all called it the castle. And rumor has it that the castle was used as a Nazi headquarters during the Second World War, and that's why it's abandoned. And there's some really bad vibe attached to it. And it looked like a perfectly good medieval-ish looking building, and it was abandoned. So I didn't understand why it was abandoned. If my school was right there, I wouldn't have to climb up the rest of the hill, but it's just nobody wants to go near it. Things like that. And the science fiction writer, Mr. Robert Schmidt, and his wife acted as my tour guide for Warsaw. And Mr. Schmidt is from Wrocław, and at the museum, the Warsaw Uprising Museum, he told me that in Wrocław there is this wall in the city center that still has bullet holes from the Second World War. So collective memory lives on. And it's still very recent history that the war and death and violence and so much destruction, it's still very recent history. And And all this threat is looming again, unfortunately, because Russia invaded Ukraine, and it's 290 days, and they're just not going away. So and that is what war does to you. I read somewhere in Korean that the memory of war goes on 3 generations. So the first generation actually goes through war. The second generation is probably too young to remember the details, but they grow up watching their parents trying to cope with the trauma. And then the third generation hears the parents' stories and the grandparents' stories, and kind of inherits the memory of the trauma and violence. And then the fourth generation may hear the stories, but they are finally removed from that direct experience, and they can go on and live their life a little differently. So I am the third generation, and I might be the last generation who actually heard the stories directly from the people who actually saw the war in their adult years. And it was just very natural for me to remember my grandparents that way. I don't know, it was very natural for me, and it was really sad. It was nice in a way when I saw that again in Poland, because it was so familiar for me, but it was really sad.
Wow, thank you, Bora. It really reminds me of how I was reading this research on how one biological body can share a body of 3 human beings. So, you know, your grandmother is pregnant, the cell that, you know, the being in the womb already has the cell of the being that would become, you know, then become their child. And so we all share our bodies in a way. And so that as you were talking about trauma as also having like a physical impact, the way it continues to live in those generations. And well, thank you so much for sharing that and going so deeply into the themes of the stories and how much they carry. I do think there's a lot about war in here between and within the characters, and that is deeply felt all the way, as everyone can see, to the very last page of the book. So thank you. I want to ask this next question, and I need a little help putting it together, because I was thinking about it for a day or two and how to phrase it. And it is a little selfish of me to ask this question, but there are these lines in the embodiment, going back to one of my favorite stories, I guess. And there are lines that I'll read several times because I experience them differently, because I start thinking about what it would sound like if said to me in Korean. And so it's like, but the gynecologist's office was not a place a young unmarried woman could visit without feeling oddly guilty, is one. And the other one is, you're carrying a child, of course your child needs a father. And maybe this is a sort of effect I'm having. But for example, if I were to, and I when I have heard those words said to me in Korean, I think my natural response was, okay, you know, I've heard that before, and I'm sure I will hear it again. There is something interesting happening. And then when I read it and I hear it in English, I feel horrified in a different way. It's almost like languages, as they have the power to connect us, they also have the power to help us feel estranged in different ways, maybe estranged in more than one language or in one place. And I wonder if, you know, is this kind of what translation does? Is translation also a mode of activism? And that's not to say it can't go the other way, that you can't have something translated and said in English that doesn't have also the same effect the other way around when you hear it in Korean. But is it sort of showing a Korean woman's life outside the context of a Korean woman's life that kind of makes it more, makes us look at it not much more closely, but look at it again, maybe. And anyone can jump in. It's really a question for you both.
Okay, I can't really talk about translation, that's Anton's job. But yeah, taking it out of context, well, I've been to gynecologists in Korea and in the US, and in the US, what I saw was generally they encourage, well, at least my school encouraged, go see a doctor regularly. If you don't feel well, then go see a doctor. You have student insurance, so if you go to the health center at school, it's free, or you pay this much and you can get this treatment. It's all laid out. In Korea, it was when I was growing up, it was a forbidden topic. You just didn't go to the gynecologist until you were married and pregnant. So being married and being attached to a guy kind of gave you the license to get yourself checked out by a doctor. It was very weird. And I had an ovarian cyst when I was 28, and my period wouldn't stop. So I needed to go see a gynecologist. And my mother told me, no, you can't go see a doctor by yourself because you're not married. And my ovaries don't care if I'm married or not. They were just acting out. And if you leave an ovarian cyst untreated, then it will pop and you will die. I didn't want to die, and I was bleeding for 2 weeks, and I was scared enough that I didn't really care, and I didn't plan to get married anytime soon. So just screw my future husband, I'm gonna go see a doctor. That was what I thought. And when I was in the US, I didn't have to worry about all those things. I just made an appointment and went to see a doctor. And in both places, the doctors and the nurses I saw were very kind, very friendly to me. So they were not scary like the doctor in the story. But the context, the surroundings were so different. And I wanted to address it. What makes Korean women, what stops Korean women from going, from taking care of themselves, from taking care of their own body, their own organs? We are alive, well, not just women, I'm sorry. Human beings who have a set of ovaries and a uterus should be able to go see a doctor when they need to, or when they feel like they should, and their costs should be covered by national insurance. And so we all have the right to take care of our bodies, and a social construct like marriage or being symbolically attached to somebody else should not affect our biological process. I mean, in the medical sense, but it is, and more so in Asia, and especially more so in Korea. And I thought it was very absurd. That's all I can say.
Yeah, I remember my parents lived in Seoul, and I grew up here. But I remember visiting my mother in college and asking for birth control pills. And I think she actually fainted. Like she just grabbed her head and just collapsed on the floor and said, "What are those and what do you mean?" And I just thought, oh, these are these things. And so she went to the doctor and asked for them for herself to get them for me. But the doctor's like, "You, ma'am, don't need birth control pills." And she's like, "No, I do. And so I remember those experiences. So I would go there and go with my mother into such a different context. And so that might be, thank you so much for writing about that and telling us more about that.
Wait, so your mother fainted when you asked for birth control pills, but she was fine leaving you when you were 15 years old in California by
Yes.
yourself with your brother?
Yes.
Okay.
So
Okay. Yeah. Oh wow. That's really
levels
interesting.
of stress, I guess.
Self control. No. Okay. I just wanted to add like just a tiny thing to what Bora was saying. So in Love in the Big City by Sang-young Park, a book written by a cisgender Korean man, there's a scene where this gay character, his best friend is, a heterosexual woman, and she goes to get consultation on an abortion. And the way she is treated by the gynecologist is very cruel to the point of being absolutely absurd. And what the female character ends up doing is she like steals like the model womb from the gynecologist's office and runs away with it. And he has to go out there and convince her, okay, this is theft, you have to bring this back. And so there's like a little cute subplot to it. So like even, a man like Sang-young Park can tell how absurd it is for women and the kind of like weird, disgusting things that they have to go through with, the medical establishment in order to get the care that they need. And, and this is also, I knew this would be sympathetic in America because, ever since Roe versus Wade was struck down, especially there's, the abortion rights have come back, women's health rights have come back into the debate. So yeah, it's still very much, when I was translating it, of course, my thinking was more like, oh, this is such a funny story because it's so absurd, and yet it's also terrifying. But I remember I was at this event where they asked me to like, oh, explain what you are doing, what you're translating right now, and I was translating the embodiment at the time, and then I was like, oh, it's this really funny story. See, there's this woman, and her period won't stop for a month, and then this other young woman in the audience goes, oh, and I'm like, oh yeah, oh, I guess this is actually quite a horrifying story. I don't know why I said that. But I remember that being like, yeah, so I think that's the brilliance of what Bora is doing. This connects to what she said about epigenetic violence, basically like how, memories of war goes down generations. Bora is, as an artist and as a consumer of art, like she's very, very much against gratuitous violence, like, women being murdered for entertainment. So when I'm translating Bora, when violence happens in her work, I can tell she's being very careful. Like she doesn't want to pass on, the trauma of it, but she does want us to confront the fact that our society is very violent. And so a story like Embodiment, the funniness, the parody, the satire, the absurdity, what that helps us is to kind of like put it within a framework to send up the absurdity and not traumatize the reader. And I think that's why, it's such an effective work.
Yeah, I think it's almost like stories are the medium for Bora's work to really help us kind of face and confront, while also not, not forgetting that it was a horrifying situation, but never getting too gratuitous. And so thank you for saying that. I have a question for you, Anton. So the work of a translator is so great and so broad and reaches farther than your work just on the page, which I see from your example. I feel like you also protect translators, you advocate for translators and for discovering voices of Korean literature. And you're a big part of the Korean queer translator, writer, activist, and more communities, it goes on and on. So I was wondering, I want to ask, many people ask you for your advice, but I'd like to ask what you would advise your younger self, if going back and looking at what you were working on many years ago before this.
It's so absurd because I still feel like I'm starting out because it's such a precarious profession. Literary translation itself is a great profession, and for my language combination, at least, like it's still a really good market. And all the students that I taught, like, they make a lot more money than I do, and they're doing great. But literary translation, yeah, it's so precarious. If I could go back and tell myself, I would say maybe try not to be a literary translator. That's what I would tell my younger self. It's going to be a lot harder than you think it's going to be, because not because you're not a good translator. I mean, there's so many good translators, but because the work that it looks like from the outside is actually is very small. Like it's actually a lot of, like you said, it's like a lot of work. Like just the email, I say it's like it's an email job. It's like 80% emails, writing emails, sending emails, putting emails together. And translation is actually like the afterthought that we put on. A translator who is much more successful than me, Daniel Han. So he is a very prolific translator and he does really well. But he also travels a lot for his work. Like he does a lot of panels and he gives talks and receives awards. And so I'm like, Danny, like when do you translate? Because the last time we talked to you, like you had 8 books under contract. And he goes, oh, I translate in planes and trains and buses. And I thought that was really funny. I thought he was making a joke. But then again, when I was on my way to Penang and flying through Singapore, I found myself translating on the plane, and I was like, oh, I've become Daniel Han. Like this is what success looks like. You're translating. You have your notebook computer open on the plane when everyone else is like watching some Marvel movie, and you're like translating, and because that's the only time that you can do it. So yeah, so I would tell myself that, oh, get ready to do a lot of work. And also to take certain things seriously, but not other things. I feel like I don't know, how do I say this? Like the publishing industry, I mean, you guys know this very well, but the publishing industry, there's a lot of BS. And you kind of have to figure out a way. You have to be very smart. You have to be able to cut through the BS. You kind of have to have like a legal pad, draw a line, and then write things that are helpful and things that are not helpful. And there are a lot of things that are not helpful. Like, people are like, oh, it's so great if you publish with this house, or if you're in this publication, or if you're reviewed by this person. I'm like, no, a lot of those things are not useful, especially not useful for, writers of color, for example, or for translations. Like there are different rules for different people, and you have to figure out like how your marketing works and how like your positionality works within the book reading ecosystem. And so yeah, it's I would tell myself that, oh, you have to be smarter. You can't be swayed by the glamour and charisma of certain institutions, because they're not for you. They just aren't. Like you're not white, you don't live in America, you don't live in New York or London, so you can't take advantage of them. So you have to operate very differently. And yeah, that is what I would. Yeah, there's a scene in Mad Men where Joan tells Peggy, you should go home, like punch 2 holes into a paper bag, put it over your head, and then look at yourself in the mirror and really evaluate your, the pros and cons of what you have, and then work with them. And I'm like, that's very cruel, but very effective advice. And that's the advice that I would give my younger self. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that is one of my favorite answers that I've ever heard. I could listen to you talk about this for many, many hours. Clearly, I thank you so much. I have lots of paper bags at home to ready on the side to do this. So Bora, I've done some digging around and I've learned that you have a recent interest with sea creatures, creatures from the ocean, and that your inspiration comes from all the copious amounts of seafood eaten by your husband, I believe, and your mother-in-law. And I would love to know how all of that is going and what we can expect to come from all the seafood and sea creatures.
Yeah, before I started dating my husband, I didn't know the fact that humans eat octopus. I thought humans live in land and octopus live in the sea, and like we live in separate places peacefully. No, humans eat octopus. Humans are evil. And there was when I was active on Twitter, that was several years ago. ago I quit, but when I was active on Twitter, there was a thread that people would say, if there was an alien invasion, Koreans will eat the aliens because we eat everything. And then like other people would chime in, like the Chinese say something similar. If it crawls on land, if it flies flies in the sky, and if it swims in the ocean, and if it goes back to heaven, then Chinese people will eat it. There's something like that. uh, yeah. So when I saw my husband eating octopus, that's what came to my mind. So I wrote a story about, we met in a labor union and we protested together. He was the leader of my labor union. So when I witnessed my husband and this human being who happens to be my husband eating octopus, I thought I should write a story about it. And he was actually like evaluating the octopus that he was eating. It looks like one octopus, but the cook must have put two octopuses together because this part tastes different from that part, and he was like commenting on the taste. So I wanted to use that line. So yeah, in this story we are protesting, and in our protest camp, in the protest tent, an alien octopus appears and my husband eats it. My husband puts it in his ramen and eats it. And then I got really angry with Putin and what he was doing around 2018 to 2021. He was with the annexation of Crimea and all the environmental catastrophe that he was causing, because Crimea doesn't have enough drinking water, and the Russian government wouldn't let the Ukrainian government transport water to the peninsula. So they started digging holes in the Black Sea, and just so many bad things going on there. So I started writing about a crab, Russian crab, building gas pipelines for the Russian government, believing that they will have a colder, better place to migrate to, and then they are sold to the Koreans so that we can eat them. So yeah, I wrote that, and then I wrote the shark. And recently, my brother-in-law suggested that I write ocean sunfish. So I started doing research on ocean sunfish, and they're just magnificent creatures, although smelly. So yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
Thank you, Bora. I'm going to ask you some audience Q&A. We've got some wonderful questions here. And the first is, was your intent in writing Cursed Bunny to shed light on some societal issues, or was it solely a sort of personal reflection?
I suppose both, because what is personal is political. And in the case of what young adult female goes through in any Asian society has to be political. There are so many things that women should not do that are allowed to men, and there are so many things that women have to do when they reach adulthood. Just her life becomes so different when compared to when she was a child, and it's because she's a woman, and she is groomed to become this perfect Asian woman, which does not exist. So it happens to every single female person in Korea. I think they have to go through some kind of absurdity, and I try to be compliant, and it didn't work. So I got really angry and I wrote my stories, and I didn't know that they were that political, but yeah, I was angry. So they were meant to be political and a social commentary, I suppose. Yeah.
The next question says, it seems like recently there are finally many Korean writers being translated into English. I was wondering if there are Korean American writers being translated from English into Korean, and if so, which ones are especially interesting to you?
So Minjin Lee's Pachinko was acquired for a gigantic sum of money by a Korean publisher called Influential. And like everywhere I go, it's like pachinko, pachinko, pachinko. It's like being in a pachinko parlor. Like, Koreans are reading this book. It is it is very unfortunate that there really should be more Korean Americans being translated into Korean. You would think that there would be a lot, but there really aren't. It really doesn't happen a lot. And I also think, though, that this is also because Korean American writers are very successful. Like they're kind of like disproportionately successful when it comes to, if you look at like Asian writers in general, and then like, oh my God, so many of them are Korean. And are like, we're not even the oldest Asian diaspora in America. And so I think part of it is that I do know that R.O. Kwan's Incendiaries is coming out. It was supposed to come out this year, but I think it's coming out next January. And they want to use interestingly, they want to use the English title Incendiaries and not, Panghwabom or something, because they believe that it's like the brand value or of the title is so high and so associated with R.O. Kwan that they want to they want to go with an English title for this Korean translation. And so I think things are improving in that aspect, but yeah, they could do a lot more.
The next question has two parts. Thank you all for this great conversation. And Anton, thanks for the Mariah Carey moment story, so aptly and hilariously captured. I want to ask two questions on literary translation. One, what type of training you think is most important for something or someone who wants to become a literary translator? And two, how do you choose your translation projects?
Thank you, Lois. So I think it's very important to train yourself as a reader first and foremost. And so you have to read a lot in Korean and read a lot in English. And so you know both traditions, and you know how to, I hate this word, but you know how to market one book that exists in one source into the target. And so I have to be able to say things like, oh, Cursed Buddy by Bora Chung, like Bora Chung is the Samantha Schweblin of Korea, is the Carmen Maria Machado of Korea, like, comps like that. But it helps you triangulate like what Bora's voice is supposed to sound like in English, because you can be like, oh, I'm going to borrow a bit of this, I'm going to borrow a bit of that. Like, so I'm going to use this voice in order to translate Bora Chung into English so that she sounds a little bit like these other authors that are very popular in English. So But in order to be able to do that, you have to be a prolific reader and an eclectic reader, but a prolific reader. That's like the big thing. And the other thing, how do I choose? It's alchemy, With Bora, I knew I wanted to do Cursed Bunny. I read one sentence and I was like, okay, this book. And sometimes I have to be talked into it. Like with Love in the Big City, I love Sang-Young Park, but I did not want to translate him because his stories, they're just very long. And I'm like, these are going to be impossible to sell. Like, I'm not going to, this is not a short story. 15,000 words is not a short story. Like, no one's going to buy this story because it's too long. And in America, it's just no one's going to buy it. And thank you, Words Without Borders. I think Susan Harris is in the audience. Thank you, Words Without Borders, for buying Zaitun Pasta by Sang-Young Park from us. But yeah, it's sometimes I have to be like, okay, but I could see how much work would go into it, and that would prevent me. But ultimately, like, I love Sang-Young Park's world, his language so much. I love Bora's language so much. So it's really the language that convinces me, oh, this is an author that I want to translate. I don't care what genre. I don't care if it's a bestseller in Korea or whatever. If I respond to the language, then I can translate this work. And I know how to make this work in English. And the marketing and the selling and all of that, that's a headache for future Anton, and future Anton will take care of it. And he always does. So, yeah.
Thank you. I like future Anton being a part of the conversation. I think we have time for one last question, and it would go for both of you. But what is your favorite part of your job?
I like killing off certain characters. That's the favorite part of my job. I like killing off bad guys.
With translation, I think because I spend so much time with my authors, I think that's the best. I don't spend physical time with them. But when I translate, I feel like they're sitting across from me. And so like every day I go to work with, Kyung-Suk Shin, Bora Chung and, Jun Samit. Like it's so nice that, I just get to spend so much time with them. They're like the best coworkers. And that feeling of company, I guess, and feeling of like hearing their voices all day, like that's a really beautiful part of being a translator, I think.
Thank you. We went a little over time, Pierce. I hope that's okay. I just didn't want to stop. It's so wonderful to hear them both.
Oh, it's absolutely okay. I didn't have the heart to stop you all, so I'm glad we came to a sort of natural stopping point. Thank you so much, the three of you. This has been incredible. I could not imagine a better way to end our year. This is our last event. We went out with a bang. Lots of lovely comments coming in. Thank you, everyone. So thank you for joining us. We have copies of Cursed Bunny. It just hit the shelves Tuesday. They're here. Thank you, Bora. Thank you, Anton, and thank you, EJ. You were so lovely, and this has been such a treat.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Congratulations.
you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
you.
Let just a couple more messages. I hate cutting people off when they're writing lovely messages. Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.